Okay, awesome. All right, so I'd like to welcome everybody for today's session. I'm Adam Berezin from MS Dynamics World, and just so everybody's on the same page, today's session is build versus buy. What's your EDI strategy for Microsoft Dynamics 365? And our presenter today is Brian Lynch, who's from Data Masons, and we are very happy to have him join us today. So just a quick note, you could submit any questions you have in the Q&A box on the right side of your screen, and at the end, Brian will get to all of them. So without further delay, I'm going to pass it over to Brian Lynch from Data Masons.
Well, perfect. Well, Adam, thank you, and for all of you that is attending live or watching this via the recording, thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day. As Adam noted, we're going to be covering the topic of EDI for your Dynamics 365 environment. For those of you that may not be aware of Data Masons, our organization specializes in EDI for the Microsoft Dynamics community and have been doing so for over 20 years. I personally have also been doing EDI for that time period, and I've really seen a lot of changes in regards to not only the back-end ERP, but also in regards to some of the choices as it goes to EDI compliance. And one of the questions that I'm often asked is, do I, use a tool set to build EDI in-house, or do I procure a commercially available solution? And so part of our hour together is to kind of talk through some of the considerations and ultimately hopefully help identify, again, some factors that may go into your strategy. As far as Data Masons as an organization, you can see some of our credentials off to the right. I think for us, we're very proud of the fact that we are certified by Microsoft, over 1,500 customers. And so we've, really helped a lot of organizations, from folks that have went down the path of kind of a tool set approach to new to EDI, to, changing ERP versions over to Dynamics. And so as we walk through here together today, hopefully some of this content will apply to you. Now, being mindful that we have a pretty large group on the line here today, I did want to go over just some basics as far as EDI. We're also going to walk through some areas of consideration, and time permitting, we'll get into a little bit of a demonstration, and as Adam indicated, we are going to do a kind of a Q&A at the end. So with that, what is EDI and what can it help you to do? And so EDI is really the notion of computer-to-computer trading. And if you think about your Dynamics system, or for that matter, supporting systems like a third-party WMS or forecast, it's often the notion of trading outside of your four walls. Now, we definitely have been involved with projects that are integrating e-commerce, again, integrating third-party WMS systems. So this can also apply for internal trading, but for today's purpose, we'll kind of focus on the outside world. And when you think about EDI, that notion, again, of computer-to-computer trading, it tends to be around the notion that there's some volume of activity that the business case to automate the processing, has been established. And so it may be one of your larger customers approaching you to help reduce costs and increase the velocity of the transactions. And so you may have an incoming sales order that is integrating into Dynamics 365, whereby you may need to send out outbound PO acknowledgments. Yes, we got the order. Yes, the price is correct. Yes, we can ship on time. Some of the areas that today, may be being answered via emails or phone calls. And so you can start to gain a picture of some of the efficiencies that a good integrated EDI program would bring to both parties. Same thing as you continue down the order-to-cash cycle, things like advanced shipping notice, letting them know that the product is on its way, what carrier, arrival date, the number of, say, pallets and boxes, the unique serialized container codes of each of those containers, really helps the receiving party know what products are coming so that they don't necessarily have to open up each individual container, but yet at the same token make sure that those products get out to the shelf or out to its final destination as needed. And then eventually, obviously, we want to get paid for the goods and services that we've delivered, and as we make those payments, or excuse me, as we receive those payments, making sure from a payment remittance standpoint that everything aligns up. All of this through the notion of also what's called a functional acknowledgement, which is really the notion of kind of an email read receipt that each of the parties get the transaction that the other sender had sent to them. And so as you look at some of the relationships that you may have, carriers with load tenders and shipment statuses, third-party warehouses such as electronic picking tickets and shipping advices and inventory levels, dealing with banks and factors, dealing with brokers and marketplaces. This is really the notion of where EDI can kind of assist on a day-to-day basis. Now, the notion of EDI really can mean different things to different folks. And so off to the left is here in North America, ANSI X12, and this happens to be a representation of a purchase order. Now, in the standards, it will dictate the possibilities of the various records and fields that are required, as well as some of the rules that will need to go in. In the middle there, we see an example of XML. This is the same information, just simply formatted in a different manner. As you can see, it's both human readable as well as computer readable. However, it is a little bit more verbose, on average about 10 times as long. And then the other area is it doesn't quite have the standards behind it. And so in this example, it's called PO underscore number, but someone could have said PO underscore num or PO underscore pound sign. We as humans know that that means the same things, but the computer would need to be told that. Whereas with one of the formal standards, like a ANSI X12, an EDIFACT, a UCS, etc., those are specifically detailed out. And then off to the right, we see an example of a flat file. Again, the same information here happens to be delimited by commas, could have been tabs, other examples. And so the two parties agree that, boy, column 3 is going to be the PO date. Column 4 is going to be the ship to address. So you have to have all of that kind of agreed upon in advance. And so a good EDI system is going to be able to support these and other formats. The other consideration is getting into the specifications. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we continue through our hour together, but I've happened to pick on Walmart. So Walmart, for instance, takes about 120 pages to describe all of the records and fields that are required for the notion of a purchase order. And at first you might think, boy, wow, that's really excessive. But when you get into an operation as large as theirs, they have ship to distribution center orders, they've got ship to store orders, they have ship to end consumers. And so as we all, as consumers, think about an omni-channel experience, EDI can really play a very heavy role in supporting some of those programs. And so, making sure that it looks as if it was shipped from Walmart, even though you as a supplier may be the one doing the actual outbound fulfillment. And so these rules become very critical because, the processes and the systems need to align up. You're only as strong as basically the weakest link in your own supply chain. And so this is where an EDI program, can really support. So what's at stake as you think about, boy, do I purchase and license, commercially available solution, or do I build? These are sometimes factors. And so as we talked about kind of from a compliance standpoint, the Amazons, the Walmarts, the, Ford, Chrysler, et cetera's of the world, they need a supplier who is timely with the information, shipping the right product at the right time at the right price. And so when those things go wrong, unfortunately, chargebacks or compliance fines, often can be issued out. Unfortunately, we've had organizations where that's been a six-figure per year consideration. If your systems are not meeting the obligation of your customers, not only do you have these compliance fines, but you do also have the potential risk of losing that business or not being in as strong as a position as you get into your regular negotiations. You also potentially have hidden costs. And so, as you're building out a program, not only do you have EDI translation software, mapping, and some of the overall integration to be considered, but again, the business rules that need to be automated, if those are not being automated properly, that may mean that you have additional labor that you need to spend in regards to trying to become compliant, or modifications to the ERP that you may need to do in order to support, the EDI program. And so again, hidden costs that you want to be mindful of. Ongoing support. As you get into the notion of adding additional business partners, these systems oftentimes become the lifeblood of the organization for, your larger B2B kind of orders. And so when you need help, who are you turning to? And sometimes one of the risks of taking this in-house is, individuals get promoted, individuals leave organizations, and so really having the infrastructure to make sure not only building the EDI system, but more importantly, maintaining it. For those of you that are considering a move to Dynamics, this oftentimes is a consideration if you're doing EDI today, because having the proper systems to help minimize testing that may be needed, where your customers need to get involved. There's techniques that you can use in regards to minimizing that disruption. You also get into, again, in a make or buy situation, the notion of turnaround data, other values that, again, maybe the ERP natively does not track, that, again, you have to be compliant with. And so now you may be looking at modifications that a in-house built system may require, where, again, with a commercially available solution, these factors have already been considered, deployed with many, many other Dynamics users. And so again, we're going to kind of talk through some of those areas. The upgrade to Dynamics itself, Microsoft continues to invest heavily, in the Dynamics 365 platforms, adding new functionality, changing some of the existing functionality, to support, more deployment options, more functionality, as you get into, quote unquote, big data and AI. We want to do more and more with our systems. And so, being able to keep current, with some of the new functionality, EDI has to play a factor there. The other thing that we'll often see is just inadequate or automation and scalability. And so, maybe, building out that first business partner that maybe had low volume, again, maybe that worked, but you really have to think about the long term. Are you going to add additional business partners? Are you going to add additional documents within those business partners? Is your volume going to significantly change? We've helped many organizations that maybe started off with, shipping to distribution centers where, as these big, large replenishment orders, you're getting, a few orders, but, for instance, maybe many truckloads. where as you start to ship to stores or even to end consumer, now you have, potentially hundreds or thousands of orders kind of coming in that, again, to touch each and every single one of them is just, really time and cost prohibitive. And so again, automation and scalability. And then lastly, you're kind of on your own. You really don't have someone to kind of turn to in regards to, hey, how is others meeting this compliance obligation? Or what are some of the considerations that you may want to do in regards to, meeting some of these compliance obligations? And so, experience and best practices really will help you speed up a lot of times the overall implementation and compliance obligations that, again, often come with an EDI program. So what does it take to make an EDI system work? If you think about kind of on the left, your own organization, and off to the right, your business partner, how do you physically connect the dots? And so a lot of times in an integrated EDI program, you have the notion of communications, for instance. This is the notion of how the document will physically pass from point A to point B. There's technologies like a value-added network, or VAN, that can basically act as a mailbox to make that handshake work. That can work in the sense that that technology has been around for a long time. It does oftentimes introduce per document charges, and so in higher volume situations, being able to trade directly, using technologies like AS2, which is a very specific security protocol using the internet and digital certificates to authenticate the parties, will come into play. You then have the notion of mapping. Most ERPs, Dynamics included, do not natively speak ANSI syntax. And even if you did speak EDI syntax, there's a lot of rules that go into the integration. And so the mapping is the notion that, hey, Walmart's purchase order has 100 fields. Where does field number 4 get placed, if I'm creating an order inside of Dynamics? Well, in some cases, that's a very obvious choice. In other situations, each implementation may be different. What a automotive tier 1 supplier is doing may be vastly different than someone in fresh produce, or someone that, maybe is trading with their suppliers. And so now you're communicating out to your community. And so mapping becomes a consideration. Then you have the notion of the integration. And so with integration, now that we've got the message, in a format that we can understand, how does it physically get into the back office? And so in the case of someone trading with their customers, maybe my part number versus their part number, unit of measure conversions, was the price correct? Hey, they see us as a single supplier, but yet, we've set ourselves up where maybe the U.S. and international is 2 different company databases, and we need to assign that order correctly. Hundreds of different examples that get into that notion of, did the transaction properly get created? And then we want to report an inquiry on these types of situations. And so I had 1,000 orders come in this morning. Did all of them make it? If number 37 did not make it, what was the problem? And as the next bullet goes into, how do I then address that issue? My customer accidentally sent the wrong part number, but I can tell what they were trying to order. Do I inconvenience them to resubmit, or do I fix the issue on my own? Each business, each scenario may be a little bit different. And so these factors will come into play. And then how do I then support this system on a day-to-day basis? And so again, making these 2 systems work, these are areas that, again, as you think about your strategy for Dynamics, building versus buying, factors that you need to consider. So as we take it a little bit more granular, and again compare, for instance, the Data Mason solution, one of the largest areas is the fact of the individual business partners that you're trading with. I gave the example of Walmart taking 120 pages to describe a purchase order. Well, guess what? They have 18 documents that they're capable of supporting with you. Multiply that out by the number of business partners that you're trading with. And by the way, these organizations from time to time make changes to their mappings. With a commercially available solution and, with the Data Masons library, these requirements are already built. If it's someone that's not in the library, it's a fixed fee, the same cost as someone in the library to onboard that business partner. When you're building with a tool set, Logic Apps, Boomi, some of the other tools that are out there, yes, you can go and build those requirements, but you now have to be responsible for it. And maybe a bad analogy, but think about a house that you can buy, versus going to the local hardware store and buy in the hammer and buy in all of the material. Yes, you could build it, but you really want to be mindful of that ongoing commitment that you're making. And so trading partner mapping is one of the bigger considerations. Now, as we talked about, you get into the fact that the system is now running and operational. How many orders did I get yesterday? And for compliance obligations, I had 100 ASNs that needed to go out. Did they? And if not, why? Getting into the dashboards and the alerts as to the flow of these transactions becomes very critical to maintaining the business. Oftentimes, translation systems or enterprise application integration systems, yes, they can speak EDI syntax, but that notion of all of the dashboarding and reporting, that's all custom built specific to you. So you have to create all of that and you have to maintain all of that. And so it's just something that you want to be mindful in regards to the obligations that you're committing to. As you get into partner management, there's really not, and most of your peers are like this, there's no field in Dynamics that says, aha, this is an EDI business partner, and I trade purchase orders, purchase order acknowledgments, and invoices. And by the way, here's the maps that I use. And by the way, here's the method of communication that I have with this particular partner with this particular document. Yes, I do need to send back functional acknowledgments. Yes, for this customer, here's whose pricing takes precedence. That's all infrastructure that you have to build. And so as you upgrade Dynamics, as you onboard new business partners, what you're doing with your suppliers may be different than what you're doing with your customers, which may be different than what you're doing with your 3PLs. And so again, all of this infrastructure that you have to take into consideration. You also get into just the overall processing. Boy, an order's an order. How hard can it be? Well, unfortunately, the devil is in the details. Boy, that customer orders in cases, but yet I fulfill in eaches. And by the way, they're supposed to be ordering in whole case pack quantities. Wait a minute, I just got an order for an item that we've discontinued where the price was incorrect. Is the system checking all of these rules that not only Dynamics requires, but maybe is unique to your business? It's what makes you who you are. You also have within the standards themselves things that may need to occur. And so, for instance, organizations in certain industries, we'll pick on, for instance, food and bev, they may need to forward a copy of that order off to a broker or deal with a broker in the transaction. And so how does the system know who and when and where to send that transaction off to? as you get into what's called SDQ orders. This is a single order that may need to get separated out. And so a classic example may be where, we're going to ultimately ship to a distribution center, but as a part of my value add, I am going to pack by store. And so that way, when it gets to the distribution center of my customer, they can simply do a cross-dock that says, aha, it came in door 1, but I know that store 2 goes over there, store 5 goes over there. And so being able to split and group this, this merchandise to make it easier on you and make it easier on your customers. Well, that's logic that you would all have to build. Same thing as you get into things like ship pallets, certain industries where you've got returnable containers and totes. There's just a lot of these types of details that often go into the notion of EDI. EDI oftentimes is not just the fact that you speak the syntax, but it's really understanding and complying with the business rule obligations related to these transactions. The other thing that you'll get into is the notion of turnaround data. And so this may be a situation where your business partner wants you to track pieces of information that the ERP natively does not track. Now, Dynamics is extremely flexible. You can very quickly add a new field. The problem is it's somewhat an ever-going battle. You add 3 fields, and tomorrow you onboard another one, and now, boy, I need field 4. By the way, field 2 changed after 6 months because the rules have changed. And so with the DataMason's Vantage Point solution, being able to trap every single record, every single field as those incoming transactions come in, and more importantly, now be able to have the intelligence that says, hey, are there certain things that we do want to send into Dynamics, or just the fact that I now have the values so I can report on them on an outbound transaction? PO1 line item sequence of how that item appeared on the original order. You would think, hey, it's the first line item on EDI, it's the first line item in Dynamics, 1 and 1, those are the same values. Well, unfortunately, no, because that retailer or business partner might have leading zeros, and so they want a 4-digit number, and you natively track in a 6-digit number. Well, how did the system know, which values? Well, maybe someone edited the order, after it came in, and so again, now that sequencing is off. And so department numbers, line item sequence are very classic examples of this. As we get into, reprocessing transactions, we've got basically a raw EDI file that's coming from our business partner, whether that be a supplier's invoice, maybe that's a customer's PO. What happens if it was the wrong item, wrong price? Is that something that you want to be able to address on your end? The other area is being able to hold that transaction. Hey, we have a rule that says any order over, $100,000, it needs to go through additional considerations, maybe even, a human reviewing it. Well, where do I do that at? Yes, the system, the mapper, was able to convert the NCX12 to, say, a flat file format or XML, but again, we as a customer service organization, they don't read XML, they don't read EDI, but they can look at a traditional header line item view to say, okay, this is the customer's order, this is the customer's date, here's its various line items. And so as you get into the notion of how do you reprocess these transactions, again, a lot of times with a tool set, you're out to basically rebuild that infrastructure. You get into the notion of scheduling and automation. And a lot of times with tool sets, they definitely have the ability to schedule the transactions. The issue gets into some of the granularity that's needed. So for instance, we have a customer that does over 150 transactions. Well, in their environment, it's not uncommon for them to get, thousands of transactions a day. probably more than any one person, can handle. So, Amazon exceptions, go to Brian, but, Walmart exceptions, go to Heather. And so the system with its scheduling and automation needs to have the intelligence to say, when do I process, who do I notify on success, who do I notify on failure, and by the way, a pricing error goes to customer service, but, boy, a shipping error, gets directed out to the warehouse team. That automation, that scheduling, and that intelligence really has an impact to the day-to-day operations. A lot of times with a build solution, you're really having your IT team take on this burden in initial troubleshooting, versus being able to empower the operational team to be self-sufficient. And so for a lot of organizations, as you think about potentially hidden costs, is, a lot of times IT is a more expensive resource to be able to maintain this. And so, that could be a resource that could be used in more strategic elements, enable customer service or operations to be self-sufficient. Not only is more cost-effective, but it's just better for the business. We don't have to jump through multiple hoops to make sure that that issue gets addressed. And then you get into just the overall inquiry. Did the ASN go out? Is this something that my business partner has acknowledged that transaction? And so again, most ERPs don't have a native place that says, aha, here's the EDI orders that we got today. And so wouldn't it be nice if right from Dynamics we could view this information, see what's going on, if need be reprocess transactions, etc. And so with the Data Mason solution, again, that's all pre-built for you. With a custom solution, these are all things that you'd have to build out. So the last area that I think is a really big one is again, that support, that best practice, the areas that really get into, the notion of, how do we maintain this? And so, again, there's different EDI options out there. What has set Data Masons apart is, we focus on Dynamics. So over 100 people, a lot of times with extensive ERP backgrounds, extensive EDI backgrounds, that really know the day-to-day processing. And so as you get into, the support of the system, again, if you think about, boy, we had 1,000 orders come in this morning, number 37 had a problem, who do I call? Who do I pick up the phone with? And so with our customers, they get unlimited support. We have a global support operations, and so we have customers that, maybe have divisions in Australia, maybe have divisions in Europe, have divisions in North America. Again, being able to have one person that can really take it end to end, anything related to EDI, we know how to actually address the issue. So in summary, some of the concepts that we covered here, again, accessing to the trading partner library, getting into upgrades, pre-built documents. These are all things that as you think about your own strategy, you just want to be mindful in regards to, what it will take to properly, integrate all of these EDI transactions. So with the time remaining, we're going to hopefully get a little bit of time to jump into the product. And so I wanted to set the stage here a little bit in regards to how the Data Mason system is doing what it's doing. And so off to the left, we have the outside world, again, customers, suppliers, 3PLs. They send us a transaction. Could be an ANSI document, could be an EDIFACT document, could be an XML document. What Vantage Point is doing, which Vantage Point's represented by the Data Masons logo in the middle, is automating and scheduling the transactions or in a real-time environment, depending on the nature of the transactions that you're doing. We're creating a copy of the original transmission, so we always have that to go back to. But we're going to normalize that to a data mason's XML schema, and because we have that standardized schema, we're now able to edit the transaction, report against the transaction, reprocess the transaction. And so as we start to push, in case, say, an inbound order off to Dynamics, whose price takes precedence? My unit of measure to your unit of measure, my address code to your address code. All of those things, that normalization and validation has to occur before we can ever really invoke, the creation of that transaction. And so in the case of Data Masons, with the Vantage Point solution, we use Microsoft's best practices for APIs, using the overall document framework. And so, for instance, using REST-based APIs, we have a synchronous method of communication. If I send 1,000 orders in and number 37 had a problem, we're getting real-time feedback as to what that issue was. You can actually trap that issue inside of the Vantage Point application so that all of the information is there to take those corrective steps, or again, potentially have the Data Mason support team work with that potential customer in regards to the resolution of the issue. You'd execute pick, pack, and ship, and at some point there's oftentimes a outbound transaction that may be needed, such as a PO acknowledgement, an ASN, etc. And so as those transactions flow, again, pulling back into the Vantage Point application, back to the specific mapping, the specific method of communication that particular business partner requires of us. Now, this can be deployed in the cloud, this can be deployed in a private cloud, and this can be deployed on-premise. This can be procured in a subscription model or a traditional perpetual license. You have a lot of different options, both in deployment as well as in regards to the licensing model. The other thing that's really nice about our system and the flexibility that we give our customers is, the notion of those trading partner maps. You can, procure those from Data Masons at a fixed fee. You can build those yourself using what we call our UDT, or Universal Data Translator, or it can be a hybrid. And so you might say to yourself, you know what, I really do want to maintain my own EDI program. My question and observation back to you is, do you really want to start from scratch? If you want to build and maintain your own mapping, why not use an integration that's been proven in the market, certified by Microsoft, and really allow you to very quickly, get started on the overall program, with the safety umbrella that if you ever changed your mind, or if you just needed assistance in one particular case, again, there is that trading partner library that you have access to. Now, one of our customers, and we have many case studies and videos out on our website, so I definitely encourage you to, use that resource. But in their example, they processed over 150,000 orders a year. And so for them, 94% compliance through, their EDI. So EDI was very critical to this particular business. It really allowed them to improve the overall vendor scorecards with their customer. It allowed them to maintain some of the staff and even repurpose some of the staff to more strategic elements. And for them, being able to very easily onboard additional business partners, really helped them as they grew, both in regards to the territories that they were in, but also the product lines. And so, again, a good EDI program can really be very supportive to the strategic direction, that business has, and how can that technology, help to support some of those growth areas. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into the solution itself. And what I'm going to do here is we'll go ahead and get that started. And excuse me here, if I can get it to maximize. And so here we've got a transaction, we've got Dynamics 365 open. And the reality of the Data Mason's Vantage Point solution is it's really running in the background. I don't necessarily need to go out and click buttons and do anything along those lines. Now that would make for one very boring EDI demo. And so what we're going to do is actually kind of run through, a live transaction. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about is the notion of what we call TLE, or Transaction Lifecycle Explorer. And so even though, EDI has a lot of information, associated with it, that transaction, we may want to find out some of the information associated with it. And so, this particular order generated that particular purchase order acknowledgement. We sent this off to our third-party warehouse, and ultimately, upon getting the shipment details back, sent our ASN off to our customer, and then we invoiced it. And again, right from Dynamics, without any, program that needed to be run, etc., we're able to hit a local browser with our information that tells us all of those details. Now again, that would make for one kind of very boring demonstration. And so let's kind of go under the covers here a little bit. And so Vantage Point is running in the background. And I talked about some of the considerations in a make versus buy kind of scenario. So the mere notion of, how do I actually connect to Dynamics, with our system that's already been developed, already been proven and certified. And so we simply say, where is our server at and which companies are we EDI enabling? And there's various business rules and settings that get into the credentials and the handshakes. Also the security factor. And so using REST-based APIs with technologies like OAuth, make sure that we've got a very secure connection. In today's world of hacks and different things, security becomes a big part of the consideration. Then we get into the notion of the trading partners. And so as we start to have many different partners, I can start to simply type and take it down. But, from our library, we can import partners that already were established. I can create my relationship to our Dynamics customer or supplier ID, etc. I can document out what business documents that I'm trading with, the methods of communication that I'm doing with those partners, some of the business rules that apply specifically to that relationship. So again, maybe whose price takes precedence, or unit of measure and other things that need to come into play. Now, if I were to manually import transactions, again, the fact that, hey, you started off with POs and maybe you did invoices, the reality is there's over 60 plus transactions that today's organizations are often under. Well, that's pre-built, with the Data Mason's Vantage Point solution. So some of our inbound, some of our outbound transactions. Now, we do not have to manually process the transactions, and you can see these interactive dashboards. So, if I needed to find out what the alerts were, I can go into those. In a true production environment, critical alerts is often 0. The mere fact that I've got one or more means that there's an action that I need to take. In this particular case, I don't actually have a live partner, so we've got, our functional acknowledgments that basically have gone unanswered. But what we're going to do is we're going to jump into our workflow scheduler. And so workflow scheduler is the automation, the engine running in the background that says, hey, I go check for new orders every 5 minutes. I send invoices out twice a day. By the way, what I do for Walmart's a little bit different than what I do for Amazon. And here's who gets notified. So whether it's paging, emails, different types of alerting and reporting that needs to go into the supporting of the transaction. Again, this can be set up on a scheduled basis. This can also be set up on a real-time basis. So a classic example might be that we're looking at a file directory, and upon the event of a file being created, wake up and process. And so the workflow scheduler enables that type of situation. This is the FIT client. You can also access this information via mobile client. so very good for the administrator that needs to check the system when maybe they're away from the office or at least away from their desk. But at this point, the system has created the transaction in Dynamics. By the way, if we did have any exceptions, there's a full error checking logic. Those error messages can be tailored to your specific operational procedures. So step 1, do this. Step 2, do that. Step 3, call Brian. This makes it very easy for, again, that operational person to be self-sufficient, versus having to jump into, raw EDI, etc. Matter of fact, if we look at a particular transaction, and this is a transaction that we just processed, I can look at basically the original message that was sent over by our business partner. So in this case, this is the raw EDI codes. But, again, if you're not an EDI expert, wouldn't it be nice if we could simply look at that in both a, human readable and computer readable? Again, one of the values of XML is now mashed up. We can see that, oh boy, yes, our trading partner did send over a BGO2 value of SA. Oh, well, that means standalone order. Now, again, is that something that customer service is going to look at? Probably not. But it is something that, again, IT or, the database and support team, again, helps to supplement the program. But all of this is happening behind the scenes. What's happening inside of Dynamics is we've got orders showing up or alerts happening if there's any sort of exceptions. And so as we now look at our transactions, again, in this particular case, we have our, our order, and that order has just kind of come in, and we've just got the one, actual order. But if I use standard Dynamics to then, execute our pick, pack, and ship, and so maybe in your process, that may be things like confirming the sales order, going through and releasing to the picking ticket, actually packing the order. Again, just using standard dynamic screens, EDI is listening in the background, making these steps occur. And so here again, I'm going to kind of oversimplify this a little bit, and I'm going to generate our picking ticket, and now, this is out released to the warehouse. They're actually grabbing this material off of our shelves. They're going to the warehouse, packing this up. And eventually we're going to have a packing slip to post so that we can know what we've actually shipped out to our customers, how we've done that. And so for those of you using advanced warehousing, the Vantage Point solution is fully compatible, as well as we do work with a number of the third-party systems. And again, lastly, we're going to generate our invoice. And so as I'm using these standard dynamic steps, EDI is working in the background to say, aha, I need to send a transaction off to that partner compliant with their particular requirements in their format, in their method of communication. All that infrastructure that we showed earlier is basically taking over to make those steps occur. And so as this is building out, again, EDI is taking that information and allowing us to process. And so as that's kind of building out, we'll refresh the system here. And so now we're starting to see some of those transactions occur, and we'll give that a little bit more time, and we'll start to see the ASN, the invoice, and some of the other transactions as we were showing earlier. So that's really what a buy solution that's specifically designed for Dynamics, that's certified by Microsoft, that's used by over hundreds of customers, enables you to do. Go to market very quickly, compliant with EDI, versus necessarily having to build out all of those infrastructure components. So we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions here in a moment. I do encourage you to go out to datamasons.com. There's some great resources there, including what trading partners that we have in our library. It's a partial list of, I think, the top 1,000 or so. We've got great customer case studies and videos so that you can hear firsthand, what this has meant to some of our customers. We also have some great material, white papers, case studies, and other things. One of those happens to actually be some of the details we've been talking about here, build versus buy. Use this as a resource as you're talking with some of your colleagues. Again, what is your strategy as you look at, complying with EDI with your programs? So with that, Adam, I'm going to go ahead and have you open it up to see if we've got any questions out there.
Perfect. Yeah, so we do have a bunch of questions that came in. And once again, if anybody had any questions that they'd like to get answered, the Q&A box is on the right-hand side of your screen, so do not be shy. All right, so first question. In addition to mappings, does Data Masons allow calls? For example, for instance, a major retailer may have orders going to DC, but we also take e-commerce orders, and we need to apply different rules and prices based on the type of PO.
Yeah, we definitely see that, and we've definitely been involved with those types of integrations. So some of the platforms that we've seen, the Shopifys, the Magentos of the world, homegrown e-commerce. And so definitely you have the ability to change the rules by the type of order that needs to be processed. And so pricing and channels is definitely one of the more classic ones that we've seen. So yes, absolutely fully supported.
All right, so another question is, do you work with any VAN?
We do actually. So we're capable of being the value-added network provider. We also support direct. However, we support all of the major networks that are out there. And there could be various reasons why you would want to do that. Maybe you've locked yourself into a long-term contract. Maybe you've got a good rate or other area that's out there. So yes, if you want to send us the list of the specific ones you're working with, we can confirm that for you. But again, all of the major value-added networks we have customers in production with. Great question.
Do you have a solution for POA? Is there a real-time inventory lookup back to D365 to validate the PO?
We do actually. So POA, PO acknowledgement, oftentimes the 855 document here in North America. And so as that order comes in, different businesses will handle that differently. For instance, in my demonstration here, that was a configuration where we were deliberately waiting for the acknowledgement, based off the confirm button. Other customers want that to happen more real time. For instance, I've got a customer that does over 1 million line items a day. As you can imagine, they don't want to be clicking the PO confirm button every single time. And so we're actually systematically calculating the inventory. We also can actually get into some of the rules. So for instance, available to promise or, make to order. Sometimes you're calculating whether or not you have the inventory at the time that's needed, even though maybe at that moment in time you don't. So there's a couple different ways that we've been able to help organizations with the PO acknowledgement. One of the other transactions that sometimes will go along with that is, for instance, an 870 order status. Very similar, but again, technically different transactions.
The next question, are there rules that can be added in addition to the mapping to allow for specific conditions? So for example, we have major retailers that we also do B2C via e-commerce and need to apply either handling charges or assign to a different D365 customer account.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen that as well. And so not only do you have the rules of the mapping, you've got rules and settings under the trading partners. You can actually use Workflow Scheduler to also do some advanced logic and scripting. So for instance, being able to add line items is definitely something that we've seen customers do. I think of one of our customers here locally that was basically working with a controlled substance. And so it wasn't enough that, that customer ordered the item yesterday At the time of the order, they needed to do a real-time web services call out to see if their state license was still valid for that particular item. And so all without Data Mason's involvement, they used our tools to basically auto-put the order on hold, do a real-time call per item to say, is this still licensed? And if all line items met the condition, take that order off of on hold, and now go ahead and put the order in. So you have the ability to do some pretty advanced logic that, again, may be just simply unique to you or unique to some of the channels that you're dealing with. Great question.
The next question, how are ASNs managed? If we need to resend an ASN, is that managed through Data Masons or D365?
Sure. So you actually have the option to, like, for instance, reprocess, out of either system. We can kind of check for conditions. The notion of ASN, an advanced shipping notice, can oftentimes come from different sources. And so if you're doing a drop ship program with your vendors, for instance, that ASN detail might be coming from them. If you're using your own fulfillment, that may be coming out of what used to be called the WMS 1 and 2 modules. Again, with the introduction of AX 2012 R3, you had the advanced WMS capabilities. And then sometimes you'll have a third-party warehouse where the shipment details are coming from them. Vantage Point supports all of those methods. And the other thing that I think is very important as we get into the notion of mapping and business rules, we're of the mindset that you want to trap the errors on your side versus sending bad data. And I'll give you some real classic examples. If you're shipping less than truckload or truckload, a lot of times you have to have a bill of lading number. By the way, if you're shipping Walmart, it's going to be a VIX bill of lading number, 17 digits long. Well, your EDI system should be smart enough to know those are required under certain conditions. And so the mapping basically has that rule, and if it doesn't happen, it basically is going to fail out. And so with our system, you'd be able to alert, reprocess, as need be. And again, you can do that, within the TLE window. We actually have a reprocess button, that you can access right from Dynamics. Or again, you can actually log into the Vantage Point solution, potentially correct the issue. So there's times where maybe you've posted something in the ERP, but yet EDI still needs to be compliant, and so you have to reprocess. And so we do have some ways to kind of work around that as well.
How do you manage the Macy's or Bloomingdale's issue of not sending the actual shipping DC? They send only the final store destination,
Sure
and the DC is a required lookup to determine the actual shipping address.
Yeah, there's a few things at play there. One, there's an EDI document called an 816 organizational advice that will basically report those details for you, in which case when you're setting up the stores, excuse me, you can basically trap what DC is assigned to it. And so what happens is in the trading partner settings, we're basically looking for what oftentimes is the buyer ID, if I remember the Macy's specifications correctly. And so we know it's not the final destination, but we know what store it's now associated with. And so by knowing that relationship, we can then go back to the address cross-reference to say, for this store, what distribution center is associated with it. And now having that detail, we can properly create the transaction as where are we shipping it to, but also what store is it for. So very common requirement. And, if you're in kind of apparel, which a lot of times those suppliers are very well represented, so I'm more than happy to have you speak to some of our customers that have that and other obligations that, again, Vantage Point's supporting them on.
Great. Next question. How do you deal with custom code built on top of AX? Does it break EDI operating in the background?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reality is almost every single one of our customers have some level of customizations. And one of the things that we've deliberately done is not embed additional code into the ERP. And so by using the Microsoft best practice with the API approach, that a lot of times allows us to inherit certain modifications that you've done, or makes it much more minimal in the sense of the work that EDI needs to do in order to connect to it. So we'd have to kind of take that on a case-by-case basis. Hey, we've rewrote, a whole transaction and have custom windows, custom forms, and we need EDI to connect to it. That's a different scale than, hey, we just simply added 2 fields to an existing form. But again, with our customer base, we've definitely seen, pretty much the gambit of, modifications that's been done to, that EDI needs to connect with.
Next question, we want to start shipping on schedules. So say one customer ships on Thursdays, we want to assign the shipping date based on the, quote, next shipping date, so the 940 to the 3PL is dated properly. Do you have a dating evaluation logic that can determine the next shipping date? Clarified that.
There's a couple. Yeah, I think I understand the question, and that may be one we can take offline to dig a little deeper. So you have a number of ways to potentially do that. So one, having Dynamics create the picking ticket based off of those schedules, one way to do it. Alternatively, and I think where this question was kind of headed, is, we know that we want to kind of ship the entire order, but it's based off of those kind of windows. And so instead of allowing the 3PL to kind of make that decision, we're going to control that based off the fact of when we send the 940 picking ticket down to the warehouse. And so to my knowledge, there's no native place in Dynamics to kind of have that schedule. And so more than likely, maybe going back to that other question, somewhere there's basically a table that's been created to define, what those shipping windows are. And so now what ends up happening is our automation workflow system just needs to simply tap into that, that new information to say, this is when I'm going to release. So high level, that would be a pretty easy way for us to kind of adapt to meet that notion of a scheduled release for the picking ticket versus, hey, I do it every day or I do it every hour, et cetera. So if that person wants to maybe follow up, we can kind of talk a little bit on specifics.
Let's see if any more questions come in. These are some great questions so far.
Agreed. The other thing I'll maybe throw out, I know we've been maybe talking a little bit more on the customer side, but again, supplier side EDI, the 3PLs, these are all areas as well. So if we did maybe dig as deeply there are some other webinars that we have available, as well as more than happy to have one-on-one conversations.
Perfect. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in, so why don't we end here? So I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to attend, and I'd, Brian, like to thank you as well for taking the time to present a great session. So thanks so much.
Great. Thank you as well.
Yep. Great. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.